Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Phil Cook, and I'd like to welcome you to our Identity and Access Management Workshop webinar. During this webinar, I'm going to give you a kind of an introduction of Identity and Access Management, the technologies, the reasons, etc. We'll get into that shortly. First, a little bit about myself. I am the Director of the Identity and Access Management practice area here at CBI. I have been in IT for at least 25 years, and I put modern there because I go all the way back to the old TRS 80s and in the Air Force and Texas Instruments 980B computers, things like that. That kind of dates me a little bit, but I've been in IT a long time. My last 15 years has been, my complete focus has been in IAM technologies over my 20 plus years of IT consulting. Dabbled in a number of things, but I would have to say that identity management became my passion and my focus for about the last 15 years. I've had deployments personally and leading deployments across numerous organizational verticals: retail, manufacturing, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, banking, finance, insurance, primary education, secondary education, law firms, you name it, just about any kind of organization I've done these types of deployments at. And deployments anywhere from, actually the smallest one was just slightly under 1,000, like 990 some users at an actual corporate implementation, all the way up to plus users. Of course, it doesn't count the implementations I did at the consulting company as I work for, which is as low as, say, 25 users. So most of these solutions will scale very well based on what you need and your particular requirements. So enough about me. Let's continue on to what we're going to talk about today. So as part of this presentation, I want to kind of introduce you a little bit more to what IAM is and also what it is not, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there around what is IAM or what really is the scope of IAM. I also want to talk about deploying IAM solutions and how you go about that at a high level, along with IAM assessments and roadmaps. Roadmap is a common term you'll hear when you're talking to any particular organization or any particular vendor around identity and access management. A roadmap is ever important on deploying these solutions because they are solutions and they are programs more than anything. We'll talk about the challenges in IAM deployments and some of the things that you'll see in various environments as you try to deploy these IAM solutions. We'll also talk about cloud versus on-premise IAM. To a certain extent, we're going to talk a little bit about the capabilities of each, some generalistic concepts, but specifically around SailPoint tools, and I'll dive into that a little bit later in the presentation. So first, we're going to start off with what is IAM. So what is IAM? Identity and Access Management. IAM refers to various sets of technologies, but really most any technology or process that's used to manage user accounts between the identification, authorization, authentication of users, and those accounts that those users own. Not only accounts directly related to that user, but accounts that user is, or that identity is responsible for, such as in the case of service accounts. You want to make sure that people are defined ownership of service accounts. So there's accountability as to how those service accounts are managed in an environment. One of the things around identity and access management is that it does require an organizational strategy. It is a program. It is a foundational program on which a whole set of IT security initiatives are based. And all aspects of IT security are important, but they must have that context of identity in order to be relevant to the user base that's there, and in order to provide a complete security solution. And so it becomes, from that perspective, it becomes more of a program and an organizational strategy, and I'll actually dive into that a little bit more shortly. Generally, identity and access management is broke up into 3 areas. Depending on who you talk to, depends on the groupings of those areas, but they fall into around these 3 areas. Generally in the access review, certification, and compliance space. Also user lifecycle management, and then user control or access control and authentication. So within these 3 areas, obviously there are sub areas. We'll talk a little bit more about those as we dive into each of these. I'll describe some more of these. And I'll dive into this shortly. IAM is also referred to via other terms. So it's also referred to as Identity and Access Governance, or IG. Also referred to as IGA when you look at Gartner's reports. So they have Identity Governance and Administration. Or Forrester calls it Identity Management and Governance, IMG. And so even the term itself is not really standardized across the industry. Everybody tries to put their own spin on it. I remember one organization I was at previously, I used to call it AIM to kind of make a play on, AIM, make sure you have the proper AIM, which is access and identity management. So everybody's got their own spin on the terminology there. But so you'll hear different references to different components of identity and access management, but just don't let it confuse you. They're all pretty much the same type of references, depending on who you talk to. So the first component of identity management is access review, certification, compliance, and even those terms are swapped out between depending on who you talk to, depending on vendors. So you have the process of reviewing access. It's all built around reviewing what people have access to in an organization and determining whether or not they should have access to it or they should not have access to it, and either certifying, validating, or approving that access on a routine basis. One of the elements of that, and we find that is more and more important, is ensuring that review of that access is risk-based. And so there are certain amounts of risk assigned to certain level of access within an organization. And what's important is to have tools that can help identify which types of access are more risky than other types of access. And it's very important to identify that and utilize that so that high-risk access gets certified more frequently with greater scrutiny. If somebody's applied a certain level of access, there are specific certain levels of approval and maybe recertification immediately based on the risk level of the access that person has. Review and access review is also has regulatory compliance reasons for performing that, and so that's had been the primary reason for companies to implement this technology, was primarily for certification, for regulation compliance, regulatory compliance, such as HIPAA and SOX, PCI, etc. And excuse me. And so that had been a primary driver. But now as we look at that and the usefulness of this access reviews across the organization, even internal auditors, general auditing, will start to use this, even though it's not required for regulatory compliance purposes, just from an internal audit perspective to say, okay, show me everybody who is in accounts payable because they've got access to funds to be able to pay various vendors for product or services. And so there needs to be a little more scrutiny on who has that level of access within the organization or access to sensitive data, pay data, things like that. So that's routinely, we see that more and more in organizations, is for doing that type of access review for internal audits. And then we also see it being used more and more because now it's becoming, it used to be that this was a unique technology, it was very difficult to implement. Now it's becoming a little more commoditized, and people are using the access review as more of a overall security initiative perspective. So just to increase security every so often, I just need to review everybody who has access to X versus access to Y. And it may not be for anything related to regulatory compliance or even from an internal auditing mandated perspective, but from a general overall security perspective. Being able to review who has access to what, who owns what accounts, how many orphaned accounts are there out in the system. So we see that being used more widely across organizations, and it can greatly increase your security posture. What's ever important from a access review is that as you review access and access across the organization, whether it be the management team, say from an organizational structure and reporting on what their people have access to, or from an application owner perspective, there are variations as to what needs to happen. Sure, people may sign off that access remains the same as it is right now, but frequently there are changes. Either some people should have more access than what they currently have based upon their peers and their particular job, or more frequently is people have more access than they're supposed to have, and we need to have that removed. So what happens after that removal is requested as part of the review is also important. You need to have, the preferred method is to integrate with a provisioning solution that ties into that application. Say if this person doesn't need to be in this Active Directory groups that gives them the file system permissions of the accounts payable folder, then we should have an ability to remove that via the application as well, instead of leaving that as manual. But at the very least, you do want to have a process in place where that task or that removal of that access can be tracked. So the solutions that are out there all provide for the ability to at least assign a task to an application owner to go remove this person from this particular permission, and accounts for that person acknowledging that task. Some of the certification engines also have like a native function without necessarily a provisioning engine, but say a native function to be able to tap into Active Directory and remove a user from a group with some limitations beyond that. But generally, we're seeing more and more for a more complete solution is the integration of it with a full provisioning engine for such functionality. So user lifecycle management is an important element of a full IAM solution. Within all organizations, every user goes through some sort of lifecycle. We have the onboarding of users and what's loosely referred to as joiners. It could be HR hiring employees, or the contracting department hires some contractors to fill a project. We have affiliated associates fed from their own systems possibly, like in the case of, say, manufacturing, may have dealers that sell the manufacturer's products, and those dealers have their own customers, but they have their own systems. So there's integration from that side and the onboarding of those particular users. Or maybe insurance agencies have agents, or insurance companies have agencies which have agents underneath them. They may have their own independent systems for that side, because an insurance agent may sell products from different insurance companies. So there's all those kind of complex relationships. Or maybe student management systems are where students come from, versus there's a faculty management system at a higher ed, and it has its own source. But all of those involve onboarding, and including customer or even partner self-registration into a corporate system. So all of those equate to the onboarding process, and we need to be able to manage those and enable that functionality easily within the IAM solution. Along with the onboarding are user changes or movers. And so as a user exists in an organization and obtains whatever access they need to, inevitably they're going to go through some sort of changes. I become inactive, people go on leave, People move locations from one location to another. People get promoted. There's organizational changes, entire department changes, which results in that person being changed. Name changes across the organization. And again, reporting relationships are just all some examples of the movers or move functions that you have to account for within an IAM solution. And then, of course, there's the ever important offboarding. I've had entire IAM projects driven from the perspective of offboarding people with, yes, okay, it can handle onboarding and changes, but what's most important is the offboarding and the revocation of assignments and rights and the ability to log into systems. But offboarding may mean multiple things. In the cases of termination, that's fairly easy. If I say an employee is terminated and they move on. However, an employee may retire, and a retired employee may retain access to some levels of company systems. And so that has to be accounted for within the system. Contractors that work for the company to run a project, frequently they'll complete a project and then will go away for a while. They become inactive. And then after a little while, they'll come back to initiate another project. So we have to account for that. There's also, say, affiliation severance, such as an insurance agency is no longer affiliated with a insurance company, and so they want to segregate or offboard all of the people associated with that agency, which is really common across between manufacturing and insurance, even healthcare with affiliated health organizations, because they establish affiliations and terminate affiliations fairly frequently. And then, of course, things like customers. Customers are more difficult to deal with because they're a little bit more independent. They aren't necessarily organizationally based, and so typically in the side of customers, we deal it from an activity perspective. Within the lifecycle management, there are functions within it which are important, and one of them is automated provisioning. And automated provisioning can be done in any number of ways. The preferred way to integrate and enable automated provisioning and to integrate systems is through APIs. In Active Directory, our typical interaction method with Active Directory is LDAP. Typically, when we talk to databases via JDBC, ODBC, things like that, some web apps, there's a lot of web services such as SOAP and REST that we integrate with them via APIs. Probably the bottom of the barrel type of integration is what I refer to as throw over the wall provisioning, which is delimited text files, which seems to be quite common and something that's been done forever in IT. So you know how things are as you do it forever, they tend to drag on into well past their lifetime, so to speak. I was hoping delimited text would be completely gone by now. I refer to that as throw over the wall provisioning because of the fact that I'm just generating a text file and sending it on to the next system. I have no idea if it's processed. I don't know if it was accepted correctly. I have no ability to query to see if, was it accepted correctly? So I refer to that as the bottom of the barrel type of integration. But in some cases where we don't have any other integration to a system for automated provisioning, then we have what's called a closed loop process where we can task an administrator to go enact this change within a system and acknowledge when it's been completed. So at least we have some tracking as to how that happens. When we talk about systems and integration, systems and application integration, that can be done at a shallow level or it can be deep. By shallow and deep refers to both the depth of the identity record that gets created in an application. Are we, putting it exactly where it needs to be in Active Directory, or do we have just say a new users container that it gets thrown into, that we give it a user ID and username and a first name, last name, and a few attributes, and then let say the help desk mature that and assign access afterwards, or do we have more deeper integration? Are we controlling group membership in Active Directory, and is it to certain sets of groups in Active Directory, or is it to all group membership? And that's said across multiple applications. I just refer to Active Directory because it's a common one that everybody can sort of relate to. So whether I'm talking to Google applications and who's a member of the Google groups and apps for business, or whether I'm talking to Salesforce and which customer accounts people have access to at Salesforce, that type of, that depth of integration is really dependent on the needs of the organization to determine how deep or shallow they should be. Another element of the lifecycle management is full entitlement management. And entitlement management can refer to group memberships in Active Directory or other LDAP directories. It can refer to mainframe screens and profiles. And it can also refer to, say, file permissions all the way down to a file permission level on various systems, including Active Directory and the Active Directory files. So it involves all three of those. When we talk about user lifecycle management, it involves all aspects from that side. And then, so that third element of what is IAM is access control and authentication. So typically when we talk about authentication, we're talking about some technologies such as multi-factor authentication. We could be talking about federation. So federation is that organization to organization trust, either internal or external organizations. So typically, say, on ServiceNow, which is a common help desk tool, you establish a federated trust between ServiceNow and your organization so that people aren't presented with a password to log into ServiceNow, because when you have an established federation, then you replace the password functionality. You don't need passwords to log in to ServiceNow, and you can't log into ServiceNow until you've actually logged into your company's identity provider. So there's a redirection that happens there and a dependency. So that way ServiceNow is not storing your credentials anywhere. And we refer to that as that entire effort as keeping your credentials inside the enterprise, so that I don't have my passwords being spread out across all these cloud services. I'd rather establish a federated trust between them and then authenticate back against my host directory, my host organization. And then from the federation side, and actually it's probably indented a little bit more because single sign-on should be its own, but single sign-on is an element of authentication. Again, it may not be necessarily a federated trust. We may still have to push a password out to, say, a cloud app that may not have an ability to do a federation. So we would send a password out there, whether it's the same password or not, as, say, your Active Directory password. Is done on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes we scramble the password, store it in the user object, and then just pass through that authentication when that person tries to hit the web page. There's still single sign-on, but it's, say, a randomized password versus a common password. So there's multiple ways to handle single sign-on. Then access management also comes into this part as well from an access control and authentication perspective. Generally, access management is policy and rule-based. Ideally, it's integrated with your identity management solution. So the core IAM provisioning engine also and certification engine should also have that tight integration with your access management solution, so that you've got a consolidated set of who has access to what. Typically, access management, when we talk about access management, is web-based access management, or WAM. And so you actually see that in some product names. It's just called the Web Access Manager, Web Access Management, or just WAM in general. There's a couple products called just WAM. And many times access management is SaaS-based, or what we refer to as IDaaS, so Identity as a Service. And what you'll see with these, some IDaaS services out there, or I should say they're web-based access management, web-based single sign-on, they're federation solutions. They consider themselves identity management systems. And what I caution is that that's just one perspective of identity management. So unless these SaaS services solve the other sides of access management, which is also the access review, certification, and the provisioning, then they're fairly incomplete and sort of kind of twisting the meaning of the term identity and access management. So what IAM is not. So along with understanding what IAM is, we have to understand what it is not. So here we're going to talk a little bit about that. IAM is not a project. It's not simply a project, I should say. You'll have numerous IAM projects, but when you get into deploying an IAM project, lean away from it, calling it the IAM project, because it's not not simply a project. It's essentially a never-ending program. You'll establish the foundations, a project to integrate Active Directory, to integrate your authoritative sources, and then you keep expanding it. And then by the time you get around to thinking you're getting close, just then something like new systems will come in. Older systems were upgraded, changing their interface methods. Your company will merge with somebody else. There's continuously changes to the IAM solution that's in place. But the important part to keep in mind is that it is a program. It is a full foundational set of technologies on which all these applications can delegate the identity administration off to one central system, and then they just subscribe to those identities as necessary. Something to keep in mind is that IT projects, or I should say, IAM projects driven purely from an IT perspective rarely succeed when you're talking about a full deployment. They are successful if it's scoped to, I'm just going to automate creation of user accounts into Active Directory from a text file I get a dump from Ultipro every day. The true scope of the IAM solution, you could actually do that with some scripts. And is that identity management? Sort of. Far from full-featured, but you got to be careful about deploying any either widespread IAM solution without full business interaction, because you are going to move people's cheese, so to speak, and people don't like that when things change, even though it's for the better, even though they'll gain access to things quicker than usual. You're going to do things as part of it, such as take away access they should not have, and suddenly people are going to start screaming. So there's going to be, all elements of a business are generally impacted one way or another from a full IAM solution. So it has to have higher sponsorship than just say from an IT perspective. So IAM is, again, it's not just simply a project. It is constructed of smaller IAM projects. It is a program. It is also not a single product. I don't think I've seen a single product out there that does every single thing that you need in IAM. I'm going to talk a lot about SailPoint shortly, and SailPoint is probably one of the most full-featured product lines out there for fulfilling IAM, but even they don't do some elements of IAM that are still quite important, and I'm going to point those out here towards the end. But products are used to fulfill IAM needs. So you can't say that, oh, I'm deploying IAM when, okay, you're just deploying a product, and I'll have other products that do other things. So be cautious against just calling IAM a product, because it is not necessarily a product. We use the products to fulfill those needs. A single product, again, may not fulfill all the requirements, but it depends on your particular requirements. And may very well be we can get all the functionality we need right now from one particular product, but knowing that there are certain elements of IAM in general that aren't fulfilled at times. Single sign-on itself is not IAM. Single sign-on, or SSO, is enabled through IAM technologies, but it is not in itself considered IAM. I've seen that a lot of times where, yeah, we got a big IAM project going on, and it turns out it's really just a single sign-on initiative. Single sign-on is just one particular element. You still have to deal with how that user account gets to what they're trying to single sign-on onto. And if there's a lack of management, believe me, I've seen it where, well, we have this big IAM project. Oh yeah, we create accounts out there manually, we create accounts here manually. Once they're both created manually and all matched up, then we can single sign-on from one to the other. Well, that's not identity management. That is purely a single sign-on project that has really nothing to do with identity management otherwise. I'm going to talk a little bit about deploying IAM solutions. I'm going to talk a little bit about why to do it, how to start, and how to avoid the pitfalls. So why do it? Why deploy IAM? One of the main reasons is increased security. It enables this concept of least necessary privilege across the organization. It allows you to centralize your access policies, and centralize who's supposed to have access to what, role-based definitions, etc. Centralize that to one spot. It allows you to set up your access reviews and certifications and remediation of people who have too much access or orphaned accounts, a process behind it. So it allows you to establish that. And it also allows you to establish, your linked account status and to enable auto deprovisioning across applications. Another main reason to do it is business enablement. I've done this in a number of companies where once the business saw the bigger light of what it can provide, this became a primary driver, where we have things like user, customer, partner registration and self-service. Rather than a team of developers having to build all this on a company website, the IAM solution, such as SailPoint, provides the capability to do this type of thing natively from the product itself, saving tons of development time. Also, the ability to do single sign-on to multiple applications is a business enablement. Now, I know I talked about single sign-on not being an IAM itself, but it is something that is greatly enables the business as customers, as partners, as employees aren't re-prompted for authentication to every application they go to. Also, it allows rapid responsiveness to user needs and requests, allows people to request access to more things if they need them. It also enables new business applications to be adopted quicker because they don't have to worry about where to get user IDs from, who's going to access this application. We just build a tap into the identity management system, and it'll auto-provision whatever accounts are necessary in that particular application, and allows those, allows the development of the application to occur for business needs and not worry about all the synchronization of all the user accounts. It also makes mergers and acquisitions less burdensome. And this has been a primary driver for some organizations I've dealt with, is to establish a base identity bus on which when they acquire new organizations, they can then auto-provision and link their organizations much more quickly when they have a central identity bus. Also, increased efficiency is another big reason for why to do it. You get employees to work faster with more immediate access to the things they're supposed to have. I can't tell you how many organizations I've gone into, and it's not unusual that it takes people weeks, if not months, to get all the little pieces, parts of what it is they're supposed to have access to get to it, to be able to actually do their job. And it's amazing the amount of manpower that's lost in that process of them trying to get things. So a full-featured IAM solution helps to better enable those employees from day one. It also provides for the capability to have more data consistency and accuracy across the organization. Sometimes I go into organizations, you'll see HR has a white pages that doesn't quite match the address book from Outlook, which doesn't quite match the birthday list that goes around the office. And oh, these people on this birthday list, these people left and all that, or their name changed, and all these little sources of data that they're all disparate, and inevitably it just takes a matter of, in some cases, days or hours before they're outdated. And a full-featured IAM solution that's well integrated across applications helps to maintain that data consistency for user data across applications. And then it also provides for self-service administration, self-service password reset, delegated requests, requests for access, assignment of access, and user updates again across applications are both all involved in increasing the efficiency of IT in general. So how to start in an IAM assessment and roadmap is where we like to start. Before you start a journey, you lay out a map to say, how am I going to get from point A to point B? There's a lot of ways to get there. There's a lot of routes to take. How long am I going to take to get there? What stops do I have? And it's very similar, and it's sometimes cliche to call it a roadmap, but it is very analogous to planning out a trip, a cross-country trip or an extended trip. So first, start with a plan. We're going to define where we're going to go, where we want to go, how are we going to get there. We want to look at, or from a general perspective, okay, I want to travel to Los Angeles from Michigan. So I start out with at least that. I want to have some sort of plan. I want to do it over this many days. I want to I want to take this car with me. You also want to involve the entire organization. I can't do all this without involving my family if my family's going with me on a trip. So involve your whole organization because they're going to be going with you as you plan out a full IAM solution. You need to prioritize what it is, what are the sites you want to see on your trip. So that equates to deciding on to, what are my primary integrations? What do I need to hit first? What are the things I can't miss? What are the things that are not all that important? It'd be nice to get there if we can. If we can see the world's biggest ball of string, great, but as long as it's on the way, but we're not going to go overboard to try to get there. Review your current state of what you have. If you take a look at what processes have in place. Some organizations have a lot of scripted processes that already account for that. Okay, so there's no good real analogy for the trip across the country, so I'll stop with those for now. But you want to roadmap out an end goal as well, and to define what will you consider success, where, what's your point at which you go, okay, this was a great trip. You want to identify that delta between your current and end state. Okay, here's where I am, here's where I want to be, what are the differences in between? And then we want to, from that, define our roadmap. So here's where it's all laid out. Here's the stops along the way. Here's what we have to see. Here's where we're going to stay. Here's where we're going to call it a break point. And breakpoints equate to phases in an IAM solution because you don't want to eat that elephant at once. You want to break it up into multiple smaller chunks. You want to estimate how much is this going to cost me? How many resources am I going to have to allocate? Phases within the solution. So this is all part of what we do as part of our IAM assessment program in building out a roadmap for organizations. And that's always the place to start, because again, you have to know where you're going to go, you're going to get there before you start the journey. That's not a place to be hitchhiking across the country for IAM. So avoiding the pitfalls, I referenced this, eating that elephant, trying to do too much at once. You need to break it up into smaller pieces. I've seen far too many projects fail where they tried to boil the ocean, eat the elephant, call it what you may, but Big Bang. I was in a project where it was called the Big Bang, where we had dozens of systems integration they were shooting for, and they wanted to go live with it all at once. And of course, it failed miserably. And not my fault, but we tried to assist them otherwise, and they didn't want to hear it. So trying to do too much all at once is a sure way to cause real stress and challenges within a project. And it may seem like everything's all important, everything has to happen at once, but not really. If you can scale it back to just the core minimum fundamentals, then you're going to do fine. Automating bad business processes and bad source data. Much like any other technology, garbage in, garbage out. So if you have inconsistent user data, if you have bad business processes that you're trying to make your IAM solution do, then you're going to fight it all the way, and you're going to be faced with complexities, overruns, and challenges. Inconsistent user life cycles is another one of those. We handle retirees in this case. Some retirees get this, some retirees get this. We don't have any rules in between. It's more ad hoc. There needs to be some sort of structured rules in the organization to make this effective. And probably a big one, of course, is that lack of full organization support. You need to have that support across the organization in order to be successful with these solutions. I'm now going to talk a little bit about deployment architectures. I'm speeding up here because I've just realized I'm carrying on a little bit much and got to work my way through this. So the deployment architectures for IAM solutions are either on-premise, cloud-based, or hybrid. On-premise are good for very large, more complex organizations that have high customization needs because they've got unique processes, perhaps some regulatory compliance reasons why they have numerous approval flows that branch out across upon numerous conditions. There's a perception of greater security. I talk to companies now, and people don't like having their data in the cloud, and so that perception of greater security, and whether there's truth to it or not, whether the cloud's been proven secure or not, it is really just a perception of whether it is greater security or not from from an IAM solution. It does enable better control of the infrastructure, allows better scale up, scale out, a little bit more control of it. And it's typically handled via perpetual licensing and maintenance for products, but there are some products that will do on-premise with subscription-based licensing. Cloud-based identity solutions or IDaaS type solutions are typically utilized for web access management, externalized SSO, but some features like SailPoint solutions, even though they have a cloud-based solution, also support full provisioning and certification, which is a huge beneficial thing right there, to be able to have a complete IAM solution that's cloud-based, providing that option without limitations for companies. And there are some limits though, because cloud-based provisioning to internal systems can have some issues because you're transferring data from the cloud to internal systems. Things like database connections can sometimes not be handled really well, especially provisioning. Obviously, lots of data loading can slow that down. And it's typically subscription-based licensing. And then we have hybrid solutions, and this is becoming pretty common. SailPoint works extremely well with this type of environment where we have some is cloud-based and some is on-premise. And again, I've talked about SailPoint a bit, and I'm going to go on and talk a little bit more about SailPoint technologies in depth a little bit here. They are the market leader. There is nobody else out there that can touch them. If you look at the latest identity and access governance from Forrester and Gartner, they are the leaders. I mean, back, watching these charts as I have over the years, I've never really seen a company like SailPoint lead to this extent in the IAM space, and that's what makes me really excited about focusing on SailPoint technologies. They just have complete answers, great organization, huge capabilities, and an excellent ability to execute across all organizations with very quick time to value. They account for both on-premise, cloud, and hybrid options, and plays very well with others. They have built-in connectors to talk to Oracle Identity Manager, to talk to Forefront Identity Manager, talk to NetIQ Identity Manager. It just comes out of the box. You have connectors that can talk to them and integrate with them tightly, which is very powerful and I think is quite unusual among other IAM vendors. SailPoint solutions evolve. There's 3 products that they focus in. IdentityIQ is the on-premise IAM solution, enterprise grade, highly customizable, highly configurable, can be made to adapt to any particular business requirement, extremely powerful out in the marketplace. Growing and expanding is IdentityNow, their cloud-based identity solution. It's greatly simplifies deployments, very rapid time to value deployments, and has great web access management functionality and excellent user portals for self-service management. And recently they acquired a different company and brought it in under SecurityIQ, which is a unique perspective, but was a gaping hole in identity management solutions, which has been the inability to tie identity all the way down to the file level, file system permission level on a file-by-file basis down into Windows servers. And so this is an extremely useful component of the SailPoint solution that is unique out there. Other IAM point vendors and SailPoint admittedly does not do multi-factor authentication as well as, say, Gemalto. So Gemalto recently has acquired SafeNet. SafeNet is a Gartner leading quadrant multi-factor authentication vendor. Symantec VIP, RSA Secure ID are all vendors that deal in that. Privileged identity management, privileged user management, privileged access manager, PIM, PAM, PUM. There are distinctions between them, but again, those are other areas that SailPoint defers to their partners, and they've got a pretty tight partnership with Lieberman Software and an extension of the SailPoint UI to give some very excellent functionality as far as privileged access management. But also there's CyberArk and IBM are also some privileged user management, privileged access management solutions. So rapidly through the last part of that, but here we are at the end. If you have questions, feel free to contact me. Here's my email address, or call the main CBI number or your CBI representative, and they'll make sure they pass their information on to me. And if you, as Matt mentioned earlier, we want to talk to you about if you're interested in a free IAM workshop, where I will come on site to talk to you and people in your organization around your particular environment, how best you might pursue an IAM program, what might be your priorities. I'm certainly more than happy to come do that for you. With that, I think I will turn that over to Matt. Matt, are you back on?
Yes. Great, Phil. That was great. I'm sure we'll have some questions for you to follow up with. Again, following this presentation with the next few days, attendees will be getting a CPE email that you can use to claim your credits. And later next week, the on-demand version of this presentation, along with all the materials shared, will be available to you in email. In the meantime, if you do have questions or you'd like to talk to Phil about the workshop, his email is there, pcook@cbihome.com, or you can reach us on www.cbihome.com. And that is today's presentation. Everybody enjoy the 4th.